Okay, let's talk a bit more about this object normal that we did. But first of all, here you can see I've basically made all the different textures. I have here this red wood and this white wood frame. I have the windows and I have the roof. But we have a little bit of problem with this red wood, because for some reason it has some mistakes in the baking map. But that's not going to worry us so much, because we can just delete this. And now it looks a bit better. But we're actually also going to activate our UV. And we're going to the roof. And even though this is not in the UV, so we don't necessarily have to bother about this, but I'm going to add this also to my... I can basically add all of this to my roof. Yeah, it's nearly perfect. There's some stuff that's still kind of weird, but for now we don't really need to take care of that. We're going to take care of our roof, however. So I'm going to make a new texture, maybe something bluish. Why not? And we're going to add this. I'm going to add a dark mask for now. Maybe, no, maybe not dark, maybe first of all white. We're going to add a pattern. Maybe something like this here. And we're going to make this soft light. And we're going to work with our object normal, which is here. And the way we're going to do this is by using this black and white conversion. Now you can see it will convert this. And now we can basically, green we don't want, yellow maybe just a smidge. We want blue, because blue is really the channel that's the roof mostly. And we don't need that much of magenta. So now we have like this mask that has a very nice from bright to dark kind of levels. We're going to copy this, and we're going to use this as, oh, maybe I spoke too soon. We're going to copy this, and we're going to use this as our mask. So we're going to select this, and we're going back to our, maybe we need to first deactivate those. We're going back to our roof texture. We delete this, and we add our mask here. As you can see, it has some really cool effects that you can use for certain things. Maybe this color just won't work. Maybe we need to be a bit more neutral with this brown. Yeah, you can see it has some small effect here, which is nice. And then we can basically go and save this, and we'll have a look at how our textures are looking right now. And it looks pretty okay. I mean, depending on what you need to use it for, it's basically already kind of finished. If you, for example, want to use it for Cities-Skylines, I would say that this material is good enough. You know, there's enough details. The only thing that we need to add now is basically the roughness of the materials, right? and we will do that. But before we do, we'll check out some things that might or might not improve how this texture looks. So what I like to do in the end most of the time is I either copy my curvature or my ambient occlusion on top of all my different materials I use. So let's say here, and I play with some overlay functions such as this, and you can see there's like it increases some sharpness of it, which is not too shabby, but it's a bit too much for my taste. So I'm just going to play with the opacity, and then maybe we'll also want to do the same with the ambient occlusion. Sometimes I just use one, sometimes I use both, sometimes it depends. Can't I use this ambient occlusion? Did I do something wrong? Maybe I did. New material. Huh. Alright. Then in this case I'll just make a copy and drag it up. Patterns, roof, here. And normally for the ambient occlusion you use multiply, and you can see it works, but it also reduces the brightness. I will use some curves on this, and we'll actually make this brighter. Maybe increase some contrasts. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of time you can invest to make sure you get the result you want. But right now we have something like this, and it's pretty okay. So let's move onto the windows, right? First of all, though, maybe I want to stop using this diffuse shader technique, and we go and actually use a different shader. And I'm going to use this principled shader. So if you don't have a new version of Blender, you probably won't have this, so be sure to use the newest version. This shader is pretty awesome, because what it does, it basically tries to mimic PBR workflow. It's very similar to PBR. It's not exactly the same, I think, but it's basically imitating pretty well. And we're going to use some more different textures. So here I'm also going to use non-color data. I'm going to put this into the roughness, and we'll actually try to create a roughness texture, just very basic for right now. I'm just going to copy this, and I'm just going to place it here, and we're going to make this black and white. So the first thing I notice is the roof looks pretty dark, which is of course based on the dark color it had. But what we can do is also decrease this level a bit, and we want to increase blue or turquoise. Yeah, I want to increase this, and maybe something like this. Maybe this will work for now. So we'll save this as a different texture, house tutorial spec. So now let's see. It's not spec, it's would have been roughness, but well, we kind of didn't do it correctly, I think. So for the roughness, I want to increase. For the bricks, I think they need to be a little bit less reflective, the roof could be a bit more, and the windows need to be a lot more. So let's work on that. So what I like to do is actually not work with this texture, but create a new folder. Yes. And I just copy all my stuff, all those materials, I copy them, and I put them in here. I think in this case it's easier if we use a different, maybe hue saturation is better, because then we can just decrease the saturation and we can actually work with the lightness. So we want this, wait, maybe, we're going to invert this, so we're actually doing the opposite. Something like this. Probably for the white it's going to be very similar. Yeah, that looks perfect actually. And the windows, we're going to make them extremely dark. Maybe not totally black, but should have them dark. Alright. And we're going to... Actually, with the windows, I noticed that if you look at it, the outside is darker than the inside, and that's perfect for what we want to have for our albedo texture, but actually for the glossiness texture or the roughness texture, we want to have the opposite. So I'm just going to go into here and find, no, it's not the white, it's here, windows, and find where this effect is, and it's here. So I'm just going to invert this mask actually. And now it's much better, right? You can decrease this and you can see this will be good. Then let's go to the next, to the roof. When we set the roof, we actually would like to have pretty, not as dark as the rest actually, and not as bright as the rest, I mean. Something like this. And then for the bricks, we will probably do this. That's fine, but I actually want to invert the reflectiveness of this material a little bit. We're going to decrease the visibility on that one. Yes. And that should be fine. Actually, I think I want to just make this whole thing work. Alright, I'm going to save this and we'll see how close or how far I am with this. I'm just going to override this, even though it's not the specular, it's actually the roughness, but I think now we don't need to use this invert. Maybe we need something to display, right? So the windows it's sometimes very difficult to see the effect of what you're actually doing if you don't use some additional stuff. For example, in this case, I want to use as a background, I want to use an environment texture, and we're just going to, I think I had one active already. Yes, I'm just going to use one of those. We are basically finished with the tutorial at this point. Maybe I'm going to also create a video where I'm just going to show you how we add this to Cities-Skylines, but really it's not just the workflow that you would use for Cities-Skylines. But you can actually create some cool little assets And the workflow I try to show you with Photoshop is basically how you would, how other programs, how more programs that are more geared toward texturing, how those programs work. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, you should definitely check out some tutorials on Substance Painter or Quixel, which are awesome programs with a lot more functions. But this is like the version where you don't need to pay for one of those programs, where you can kind of get a feel if this is something you're interested in, if this is a method you're interested in continuing, or if you just have very other ideas on how you should texture, or yeah. So just to end this tutorial and sum up what we have done, is basically we had a mesh like this, and what we came out with is something like this. So maybe you would say this is way too much effort to put into something small like this, but actually I think textures are indeed something, or somewhat really important, when it comes to creating believable assets. I think it's not only geometry that plays a big role, but how believable and how good your textures look. And I don't mean believable in a sense of realism. I mean believable in a sense of fitting to whatever you're using it for, right? And I think I could use something like this, for example, pretty well in Cities-Skylines. But of course, you could also use it for a backdrop render or something like that. Yeah, so I hope that you liked my very long tutorial, that I'll probably have to split into a lot of parts, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. This video is kind of the video that a lot of people suggested when I actually did a video on modeling for Cities-Skylines. A lot of people suggested, oh, could you maybe create a different tutorial or an updated version of what you're doing? And so I decided to do this. I know it's maybe different, but I hope there's